Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's so nice to have you all here for this amazing evening with Rebecca Solnit to discuss Not Too Late. Can we give it up one more time for these amazing folks? My name is Zia. I'm an English teacher at Berkeley High and one of the climate literacy teachers. And I want to give a sincere thank you to everyone who helped make this event possible, to the Berkeley High and BCC librarians, Neelan Gore, everyone else who's here tonight. Thank you so much. Can we give it up for all those folks? So we'll start this evening with a land acknowledgement, and let's all just take a moment to breathe. And if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes and put one hand on your heart and one on your stomach. Let your feet sink into the ground and try to connect to the earth below us. Let's remember that we are human animals that share this land with all other species and the living and non-living entities of the earth. Let's remember that we are living on colonized Ohlone land. Our schools reside on Huichin, the ancestral lands of the Lishan and Muwekma Ohlone tribes. We recognize and affirm that globally indigenous peoples continue to be impacted by the legacies of colonization, and we uplift their collective resilience. We acknowledge that these lands were stolen from the Ohlone people. In solidarity with all indigenous people and their right to self-determination and justice, we aspire to work towards accountability for that theft and toward being active partners in the healing of the intergenerational trauma which persists to this day. Let's remember that we are humans and not machines, and to be good to ourselves and the people around us. And if you haven't yet, you can open your eyes. I'm going to turn it over now to Ellen McClure, the TSA for climate literacy in our district.
Thank you, Zia. Well, good evening, everyone. We're so thrilled to be here this evening to discuss climate action and hope, which are several themes in the book, Not Too Late, Changing the Climate Story from Despair to Possibility. As demonstrated by the turnout to tonight's event, it's clear that people are ready to take climate action, and we look forward to discussing what that could look like and how to bring others into the movement. As Zia mentioned, my name's Ellen McClure, and I'm the climate literacy teacher on special assignment for Berkeley Unified School District. BUSD's climate literacy program began in 2021 after the school board passed the student-written climate literacy resolution entitled An Educational Response to the Climate Emergency. One of 4 similar school district resolutions in the state of California, it commits to graduating students who are well-versed in climate change science, issues, solutions, and environmental and climate justice as a civil rights issue. The resolution states that now is a time to educate students for the world they'll be entering after high school. Over the past 2 years, our climate literacy working group has addressed the goals of the resolution through creative and persistent efforts. We are creating spaces for students to explore climate change and what solutions look like. Teachers are developing lessons and hands-on projects that are age-appropriate, informative, and uplifting. Students are speaking before the school board and advocating for sustainable practices. Our schools are celebrating this work through campus activities, climate literacy showcases, and the upcoming district climate fair, which is happening this Saturday at Longfellow Middle School. So we invite you all to come. At the end of our first full year of our climate literacy working group, we gathered together to reflect on the year and share highlights from student and teacher accomplishments. So it was fitting that our send-off to the summer that year was a copy of Not Too Late for all of our teachers. We ended our year with a reading from the book and began our first meeting of this school year with another excerpt. This week, many 9th grade English classes at BHS read and discussed several excerpts from the book as well. So in this way, Not Too Late has been an inspiring guide for our climate literacy work in BUSD. And given our connection to the book, it's such a privilege to be able to be in conversation today with Rebecca Solnit and 3 incredible Berkeley High School students to discuss the themes of the book. Yeah. So I'd like to begin by introducing our students. And it's such an honor to be able to introduce each of these inspiring activists that you're going to be hearing from this evening. Taylor Raynaud is a Berkeley High School freshman. She's a journalist with the Berkeley High School Jacket and a producer of the Jacket podcast. In addition to her work at the Jacket, she's involved in youth and government through the Berkeley YMCA. In her free time, Taylor enjoys dancing and loves cooking and baking. Azucena Uribe is a Berkeley High School junior. Azu is passionate about social and environmental justice for all and has organized with BHS Sunrise. She's been a member of Jewish Youth for Community Action and Jews Against Marginalization for over 2 years. They work with the nonprofit Olamim, an organization for Latinx and Jewish families. They also enjoy dancing at Destiny Arts Center and Berkeley High. Amelia Monagle Olson is a senior at Berkeley High. She's the vice president of the BHS Sunrise chapter and has been actively involved in the campaign for a Green New Deal for Schools resolution. Amelia is also one of the student leaders of the Amnesty International chapter at BHS and is a student leader with the group Students Demand Action, a gun violence prevention group. And now I'd like to introduce our final guest for this evening's conversation. Rebecca Solnit is a writer, historian, and activist, and author of 25 books on feminism, environmental and urban history, popular power, social change and insurrection, wandering and walking, hope and catastrophe. She co-edited the 2023 anthology Not Too Late, Changing the Climate Story from Despair to Possibility. Her other books include Orwell's Roses, Hope in the Dark, Men Explain Things to Me, and A Paradise Built in Hell, The Extraordinary Communities That Arise in Disaster. And many of these titles will be for sale after the talk. A product of the California public education system from kindergarten to graduate school. She writes regularly for The Guardian, serves on the board of the climate group Oil Change International, and recently launched the climate project Not Too Late. As an avid reader of her work for many years, I'm personally thrilled and hope you all will join me in welcoming Rebecca Solnit.
Thank you so much for being here today. Our first question is to ask, what was the inspiration behind Not Too Late? What made you write this book? What was the goal? And what was the process like bringing it all together?
My friend Thelma Young Lutuna Tabua, who's a Fiji-based climate organizer, and I met through some pandemic mutual aid organizing in 2020 and started a conversation because we felt like nobody was really addressing a lot of the grief, anxiety, and despair in what felt like a constructive, direct way. And we also felt like a lot of that was due to people not having good facts, good frameworks, a good sense of what the climate movement has done, can do, a sense that they have some power. And so we actually thought we were going to do a podcast till we realized that that requires a lot of skill and time we didn't exactly have, and money. So we did a website that's nottoolateclimate.com and started posting on social media and things like that. And it was really funny. I told a bunch of friends I'd stop writing books because I wanted to be a better climate activist. And had this new project, and I told them about it, and they just all looked at me and were like, Rebecca, that needs to be a book. and I was like, and I was like, oh, because in a way, I think I was having a very Protestant moment that like giving up the one thing I'm moderately good at and know how to do made me a more noble person, which, but But also I have a fabulous publishers at Haymarket, which publish this. So Thelma's on Fiji time. I call her the girl from tomorrow because it's, I always think of it as 5 hours later, but they're 19 hours ahead of us. So like she got on board and I had an agreement to publish by 10 a.m. the next morning and told all it was all Berkeley people I was having dinner with. Berkeley made me do it. But we really felt that there's a lot of books on climate. There's a lot of great websites, podcasts, blogs, wonderful scientists and organizers on social media, meetings, etc. But there wasn't a really good introduction to climate that was an encouraging and broad one that covered science, activism, our kind of emotional and spiritual inner life, some history, and looked at some of the geography of it, the global south and the global north, etc. And so we wanted to make that book, and we kind of feel like we did. It was really fun, actually. We came up with our dream team, like what do we want to cover, and then who do we want to invite, like who's going to be our person to talk about this, about this, about this. And everyone we asked said yes one way or another. Some of these articles had been previously published but were updated. Some people didn't have, like Adrienne Ree Brown and Antonia Uhas didn't have time to write, but they did interviews with us. But we got them all in, so it was really great.
So, Rebecca, can you read us a passage or from your book that stands out to you? I know you brought a little.
Yeah. The book's sort of meant to be read more at leisure. It's every chapter is concise. I don't think any of them's over 2,000 words, except for Hannah's, which I cut down from 7,000 words with another 4,000 of footnotes. It was an academic article on climate colonialism, but so vital to have in the book, and she's become a friend. But so for you all, I also have lots of notes in case I need to throw out climate facts, because one always should. And but I felt like I wanted to I talk a lot about good facts and good frameworks, and I wanted to just give a really quick overview of those. I sort of thought this would look like a Berkeley High audience. I noticed a lot of silver hair. That is definitely not people who definitely graduated from high school a little while ago. How many of you are high school or younger? Yay! Hello, future. Hello, people who might be hanging out in 2100. So I want to see us do what the climate emergency requires of us for the sake of all life on Earth, for wild things, for other species, for the poor, the indigenous, the people in the global South, the young who will live to see the 22nd century, the people who will be born on this beautiful planet in 100 and 1,000 years. I'm also a nice lady who doesn't want people to feel bad when that feeling is just misery and not energy for action. And I think that for both of these agendas, good facts and good frameworks matter. They can be hard to come by if you get your climate information and broader perspectives from the mainstream media or from the shit people say on the internet. I mean, there's some completely amazing people, brilliant climate scientists and organizers saying great stuff on social media, but there's also a lot of disinformation and misinformation that really makes people feel confused or defeated, and often that the future has already been decided, which is why this is called Not Too Late. We're deciding it now. So, and there's not much to teach you how to sift that out. So a lot of my climate work boils down to facts and frameworks, at least when it's about speaking roles and not just protests and supporting organizations and donating money and all that other stuff I try to do. So I made a short list of annotated facts. I think there's 5. First of all, number 1, it's not too late. Of course, there has already been terrible damage, and there's some ongoing damage we can't stop. But there is a lot we can stop. It's unlikely, but not actually impossible, for us to actually go carbon negative, draw down some of the carbon dioxide emitted over the past 150 years, especially the past 30, and actually stabilize the climate and cool down the planet. We actually know how to do that, and scientists weren't talking about that until recently, but as humanity, our hand is on the thermostat. We've been turning it up for 150 years. We can stop that, but we also can turn it down. And even if we can't do that, we can do a lot. And everything we do matters. Every 1/10 of a degree of warming we prevent matters. Every forest we can protect matters. Every energy transition in every locality matters. The future is something we're making in the present. And in a big way, we're deciding that future right now. 6 years ago, climate scientists told us we had 12 years to get it right. A lot of good stuff has happened, but not nearly enough in the first half of those 12 years. We've got 6 left to organize, amplify, and push on. And change is not always predictable. It can go slow, 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 fast. It can be you build, 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 nothing happens, and then everything happens. So there will always be something worth doing, and never more so for the fate of the earth than in these next 6 years. So, 2, one of the great pieces of misinformation is that most people think nobody cares about the climate, or most people don't care about the climate. That was actually true 10 or 15 years ago. A lot of ideas that are just wrong because they're out of date. And most people care a lot about the climate. They may not be experts, but they're very aware of climate change, and they want to see action. They want to see the world change in response. They want to see the government spend money. They want to see things change. And that, I think, does a lot to help people feel less lonely. Because I think a lot of people realize climate change is terrible, and but feel like no one cares because they don't see that a lot of people do. Greta Thunberg actually said, I know so many people who feel hopeless, and they ask me, what should I do? And I say, act, do something, because that is the best medicine against sadness and depression. And then Bill McKibben, who founded 350.org, wrote the first popular book on climate change in 1989 and started Third Act for climate people over 60. I've seen him many times be asked, what's the best thing I can do as an individual? And he always says, stop being an individual. Unless you're a senator or tremendously wealthy or something like that, you have power, but as part of a group, not as an individual. 3, the problem is not all of us. It's the fossil fuel industry and other major sources of greenhouse gases and their political activity, and the banks, shareholders, and politicians who protect and benefit from the destruction. And it's also not everybody, because the richest 1% of humanity has a bigger climate impact than the poorest 66% of humanity. So the farmer in Bangladesh is not equivalent to the billionaire in Manhattan or Silicon Valley. And, it's not all of us. And that's also why we don't need people to stay home and have personal virtue, aka have a climate footprint the size of a deer mouse. But the fossil fuel industry's really pushed climate footprints because they want us all to stay home and think that we're the problem, and try and perfect ourselves rather than go after them. So, but we need to go out there collectively and go after their enormous climate footprints, stop extraction, speed the transition to clean energy, electrify everything, design a world that works better for the climate, which will also work better for social justice and for our connections to each other and nature. 4, we have the solutions. This is another outdated thing. I didn't fully understand until not that long ago that in the year 2000, wind and sun were really primitive, expensive, and utterly inadequate technologies to solve our problems. We have lived through the most astonishing energy revolution, in many ways bigger than the Industrial Revolution. We can make more power than we could ever possibly use from wind and sun, and it keeps getting cheaper and more efficient, and problems of materials, battery storage, transmission, etc., are getting solved. People all over the world are working on it. And so we have the solutions, we know what to do, we just have to overcome the obstacles to doing them. At 5, there's always this grumbling like, oh, it's very expensive to do what we need to do. But in fact, it's so much cheaper than have the world fall apart. It's really like, it's like fixing your car versus having your car blow up. Not that cars are a very appropriate example here. And oh my God, it will cost another it costs $200 for a muffler or for this new part, and versus it'll cost $10,000 if the engine blows. Or so there's been a lot of grumbling that building all these new clean power sources and transmission lines and stuff costs money, but doing nothing is so much more expensive, and that cost comes as damage to cities, towns, farms, crops, transportation, nature itself, to individuals, to people in the Arctic, to indigenous people, to people in the global south, to people particularly in Africa, the tropics, and the Arctic. And I feel like we in the global north don't have the right to do nothing. When we give up, when we get passive, when we quit, we're quitting our solidarity with them. We're quitting our responsibility as people who have power and climate impact, but also economic and political impact. So a new article in the scientific magazine Nature estimates that the damage caused by doing nothing by 2050 will cost 6 times more the cost of keeping global warming to 2 degrees centigrade. What expensive often really means is that it'll cost the fossil fuel industry and related industries a lot, because they'll cease to exist in a lot of senses. People who continue to invest in them will lose money. But for the rest of us, it means a better world. And the rest of us not only means humans, it means the big we of all species, plants, animals, etc. And all of us also for now, the end of the century, the end of the millennium. And we're making decisions for the next 10,000 years. So 6, a lot of people feel like we haven't done anything. The climate movement has not done nearly enough, or we would be just like sitting and resting on our wonderful victories. But we have done a hell of a lot. This would be a radically different world without the climate movement. And we see that every day. Today, the Bureau of Land Management, second story on the front page of the Washington Post, completely changed their priorities for 10% of all the land in the United States. From now on, the decisions will not prioritize extraction and exploitation, which is always profit for a minority. It will prioritize conservation, protection, and the well-being of the whole. That is a revolution that was almost unimaginable. And like so many things, it's easy to feel like the government gave it to us, but a government that had a completely different worldview, because the climate movement changed our worldview, changed our priorities, because direct action and pressure and the transformation of ideas have real consequences, and that turn what begins as a beautiful idea or a radical idea ends up as something tangible, practical. The oil that won't be extracted, the coal that won't be mined, the forests that won't be cut down. And so that, so the climate movement has done a hell of a lot. There's a long list of climate victories I compiled in the Not Too Late anthology. We need to do a hell of a lot more. We need to get more powerful than the fossil fuel industry. We need to expand what we're doing and accelerate it. But we have done a lot, and that's important to remember. So that's some of the facts as I see them, some of the big ones. But I also think in this country, we're often given really disempowering frameworks. By frameworks, I mean the broad ideas we filter specific information through. I think we get those bad frameworks about two really important things for climate and for activism, generally, or 3. These things are the nature of power, the nature of change, and what was the third one I added after I wrote that sentence? The all or nothing perfectionism. So we're constantly told that power resides in a few exceptional people. Just like in superhero movies, most of us are fucking losers. And then there's somebody very muscly who's good at violence who's going to save us all, which is a really annoying misrepresentation of how we save ourselves, how we take care of ourselves, how we change the world. So, like the extremely wealthy, the extremely famous, powerful, high-profile or high-powered politicians like senators, presidents, governors, do hold a lot of power. But a lot of us don't have power, much power. We have some power as individuals in our consumption, in our participation as citizens, in voting and writing letters to editor, sitting in city council meetings, like that fucking amazing one Berkeley had that banned gas hookups in 2019. I'll have a little more to say about. And, but we have power together. And one of the things I always say is that Sometimes your enemies see you most accurately. The fossil fuel industry is terrified of the climate movement. The Republicans who protect it are terrified of the climate movement. They know we're powerful. They know we can win even when we don't remember it. So I think that's really an important part of it. We have power. So, and like the story I just told about protecting 10% of all the land in this country, you can, the short-term memory says, oh, nice, powerful people gave us this nice thing. The long-term story says, this happened because of organizing, activism, grassroots people we should feel grateful to, even if we never know their names. Just like President Biden canceled student debt last week, a bunch more student debt. And again, you can say, oh, the nice man gave us something. But what really happened is that out of Occupy Wall Street came a very powerful debt abolition movement that really transformed the whole conversation about debt, made its exploitation and corruptness visible, the way it destroyed lives, completely changed the rules. And if there had been no movement, there would have been no debt cancellation. So at the end, you see the very visible people, but you got to see the whole story. So that's power. But the other, and I will wrap this up shortly. But the other thing I would say is change, because I also feel like people often tell what I call instant results guaranteed or your money back stories about change. They treat change like ordering a pizza. We ordered a pizza. If it doesn't arrive right away, we don't get anything. But, changing the world is really different than ordering pizza. I really see people have it's like if we protest on Tuesday and the government doesn't say you're right and we're wrong and we're going to give you everything you asked for, then the protest failed. But a lot of change is indirect. A lot of it takes a long time. It took 11 times to stop the KXL pipeline that would bring dirty crude from Alberta to the southern U.S. for export. It took 80 years for women to get the vote. It took decades to abolish slavery, more decades for civil rights. Marriage equality began with queer rights movements in the 50s and 60s and 70s. So people often fail to see how change works. And if you don't see that, and I think that's so central to hope, is to learn from the past. How did we get this really good thing? Everything good we have in our lives now, almost, whether it's this protected landscape or this right, came because people fought for it in the past. Remembering that, I think, gives us hope and also gives us templates of how change happens and that we often don't have. In the Berkeley City Council gas ban in 2019, I know that I always knew when I talked about, lots of people would be, oh, Berkeley, whatever. You're probably used to that. And what's one little city? Or are you a city or a town? Ooh. Do you all have very strong opinions about that? I'm from San Francisco, and we're very clear what we are before we became a suburb of Silicon Valley, but never mind. But, you can say, oh, that's just one small city. And but it became a template for 50 other California municipalities and then for New York City. And some of those municipalities were LA, the second biggest city in the country, for the whole state of Washington, for other parts of the world to say, oh yeah, banning gas hookups is a really important part of the transition. And Berkeley's, and also the short narrow stories, and then your ban was overturned. But I'm hoping there will be another one soon. I don't know if it's in the works. I bet some of you do. But even though, and so you can say in a way, Berkeley's gas ban failed, but it failed to ban gas hookups in Berkeley for now. But it succeeded in a whole different way. You have to recognize those indirect consequences. The Standing Rock protest didn't stop the Dakota Access Pipeline. They might still, it's not done. They galvanized extraordinary organizing and hope and solidarity among Native American people and non-Native supporters. My favorite story is that a college graduate and her friends from New York got in a station wagon and came out. And 2016, you would have never heard of this young woman who came out with her friends, a young Latina, but she was so moved by what she saw at Standing Rock. She did this completely wild thing that I'm sure 99.9% of people would tell her would never work. She decided to run for Congress against the third most powerful Democrat in the House. All of you have heard of her. Her name is AOC. The Dakota Access Pipeline battle and the movement at Standing Rock inspired her. She introduced the Green New Deal that the Sunrise Movement helped bring into Congress. That didn't pass either, but it became a template for Biden's climate platform, which became Build Back Better, which didn't pass, but became the Inflation Reduction Act, which not only passed, but became an incentive for a lot of other countries to step up their climate action. For a lot of, the impact of that is so huge, it's hard to measure. So, and then the last thing I just want to say is another framework I see all the time in climate activism is the all or nothing. If we can't save everything, we can't do anything. If anything that's not perfect is terrible. If we don't win everything, we lose everything. And we can't save everything, because then we would have had to start. We were losing things 100 years ago. Species were going extinct. We were losing things 50 years ago. We were putting more carbon into the atmosphere. I'm really old. I was born at 311 parts per million of carbon dioxide. We're at like 420 something now. And but we can, just because you can't save anything can't save everything doesn't mean you can't save anything. We can do so much right now, and the difference between the best and the worst case scenarios are so extraordinary and important for so many beings, and we just got to do it. So, so those are the three frameworks: the nature of power, the nature of change, getting past kind of binary all or nothing stories, and so I just wanted to kind of lay out those things as like my sketchbook for looking at how we tell climate stories.
Thank you so much. That was so moving. So kind of to go off of what you just said, you've written so many different books on so many numerous topics. Why climate change, and why now?
And there was a long period, and I read Bill McKibben's piece in the New Yorker that turned into the first popular climate book, and I was already working with Rainforest Action Network. I think one of your questions was, when did you start? I remember talking to, being a really shy 20-something-year-old standing on a corner in San Francisco's financial district saying the Amazon rainforest is the lungs of the earth, and having some mansplainer correct me. And now I think about it, it's like, yeah, because forests are crucial to the climate, and so maybe I can count 1988 as being a climate activist. But I used to be, climate is really important, and so is this other thing I worked on. I worked on indigenous rights, I worked on anti-nuclear stuff, I worked on forest protection and a lot of other environmental stuff. I did a ton of feminism because men should stop killing, beating, and raping women. Everybody should stop doing that to anybody. Not that everybody's doing it, but this could get very confusing. And then it just, it became clearer and clearer to me that the climate was more important than everything else. There's an Old Earth First bumper sticker. There are no jobs on a dead planet. That everything else we care about, human health, human rights, that if you don't have the basic physical well-being, if you die of air pollution when you're 23, you don't have any rights when you're 45 because you didn't live that long. And almost 9 million people a year die just of particulate matter from fossil fuel emissions. It is huge. And so I just gradually came more and more into it. I was friendly with Bill McKibben when he founded 350, and I supported them from the inception, however long ago that was. It's like 17 years or something. And I just did more and more. My brother David, whose fantastic art, which you see at almost every Bay Area climate protest, was, we had converged in our anti-nuclear work. We converged again in climate work, and he always understood that it's always justice work. And then, I got invited, and I was always kind of waiting, what is my job? I kept waiting for someone to tell me what my job was. I donated money. I went to protests. I wrote about it in, newspapers and stuff. And then finally, it just felt like my work I'd done around hope and stuff was really my work in climate. And I was kind of doing that. And then, I'm now on the advisory board, but probably stepping down from Dayanu, a Jewish Voice for Climate. Third Act, Oil Change International, and I have the Not Too Late thing with Thelma. So there's a lot of things I'll never stop being interested in and caring about, but I'm mostly climate these days. And it's been really exciting being around so long. I remember how timid, polite, and in some ways unambitious the climate movement was in the early 2000s. And, we weren't big and strong enough to say, we need to take on the industry directly and just shut it down. We need to stop all new extraction. We need to stop all fossil fuel subsidies. And we didn't have the solution. So long-term things really give me hope. So.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask you how to bring other people into this movement. The essay by Mary Anais Hegler really resonated with me when she wrote, "Every single person has a powerful role to play as a midwife in this rebirth of a movement." And in your experience, how do you bring other people who might not have as much knowledge about climate change or who haven't been involved in the movement into the work? I know you already answered this but how do we?
I did. Yeah. I think the first thing is be really nice to them. And remember that there was a moment where you didn't know everything either, even if you think you now know everything. There's a wonderful thing by Alicia Garza, who co-founded Black Lives Matter, where she talks about somebody brought me in, somebody, educated me that, and I've seen a lot of activism where people are super snarky to someone who gets, doesn't have the perfect position, doesn't know all the facts. And I joke now that there are organizers. The true goal of an organizer is to bring people together, to motivate them, to draw people in, to be welcoming. A disorganizer, and God knows there's a lot of them on the left, is somebody who's actually going to be a perfectionist who's out there to tell everyone else they're not good enough and make them feel nervous, make them shut up, make them stay home, make them feel unwelcome. So, so I think it's inviting people in, encouraging them. If you want to share information about ideas, values, or facts with them, find a way that doesn't feel patronizing or judgy that they don't know them. Remember that you didn't always. And then I also think so many people want to know, what can I do about climate? I've been at so many protests and meetings and stuff where that's people's real question. Not can we save the world, not the outcome of this election or, that technical question. It's like, what can I do? And there aren't really good answers. So we put out Not Too Late, the book, and then I realized, we gave people the overview and the encouragement we wanted to, or at least we covered it the way we wanted to, but we didn't actually answer that question. So I think they're handing out here this brochure we created, or mostly I created, with art by my brother David, called What Can I Do About the Climate Emergency? And I tried to give the most well-organized overview, because usually what you get told is donate, vote, come to our protest, sign up for our mailing list. But there's so many different things that matter, and everybody has really different skills. And some people, they're not citizens, they're not able-bodied, they have good reasons to be afraid of the police, etc. They don't want to go to protest. They don't want to risk arrest, and or deportation or whatever. But there's things for them to do. If you have a lot of time, there's things you can do. If you're young and footloose, then you want to join a camp out pipeline protest, there's that. But if you're old but really good at writing letters to the editor or participating in city council meetings on Zoom, the scale could be from putting solar panels on the roof of your high school to international treaties. There's often a sense from people that everything happens at the federal level and nothing can happen when we have a Republican. May that not happen again ever for a very long time. Well, I'd go forever. But California was making really important climate legislation all through the Bush and Trump era, and cities are really important and set their own policies on a lot of important stuff. Protecting agriculture and nature is really important. And so there's really something for everybody. That's partly about your skills and partly about your passions. And I also think, first make people feel welcome and meet them where they're at. And second of all, help them figure out what their piece of the climate movement is. And there's so many amazing stories about people and who, people who are 11, people who are 90, people who are housebound, people who don't have citizenship, doing absolutely amazing things. There really is a role for everyone.
Sorry. That actually was a question I was going to ask earlier about for to be more specific for people in the Bay Area, of course I'm dropping everything. Where can people start? There's so much good work going on in the Bay Area.
Yeah. And a lot of it, I think, is just really getting, I wrote this as a kind of thing that would work anywhere in the US, so I didn't get super specific. A lot of it is finding the organizations you might want to work with and feel at home with, whether it's just a little group of citizens trying to get a city council to pass some legislation, or it's joining, if you're young, the Sunrise Movement might be for you. If you're over 60, you're super welcome to join Third Act, and you just have to look up thirdact.org. There's a bunch of information. There's a bunch of East Bay people who belong. 350.org, Greenpeace, the Sierra Club are still doing a lot of good stuff. Extinction Rebellion and some other groups are a little more edgy and in your face. There's often specific things happening. It's also really good to be informed. I think you don't have to know everything. The climate scientists don't know everything the organizers do. The people who are experts, even the people who are climate scientists, have specialization, and the people who know about oceans don't know everything about atmospheres or forests and stuff. So, but having enough equipment to function with, to be like, this bill is bullshit, this one's really important, etc. The Bay Area and California are kind of interesting in that sometimes we have to push our elected leaders to do more. But, there are parts of California with Republican Congress people, and I think we have a few Republican mayors, but we're mostly a blue state. So it's mostly getting people who agree with you in principle to really act when it comes to legislative stuff. And that's another big decision. Do you want to work kind of within the system or outside the system? Do you want to be in the streets? Do you want to be in the meetings? Do you want to be, So that feels like part of it too.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Another question we had was in the chapter where it's the essay, here's where you come in. The author, one line that particularly stood out to me was check your savior complex at the door, please. And I was just wondering, how what your experience is with that, a savior complex, and how that interacts with a white savior complex and kind of the masculine identity. How does that impact? How does that come? What does that look like in the climate space?
And every movement I've been part of has people who think they have all the answers, who often are not actually good at being part of a group. Because you have to be interested in listening, and sometimes people come up to me after and they have the amazing solution all the brilliant engineers in the world never thought of, then we should just all do it. It's kind of in there with the contrails and hemp people, but sorry. And one of the things this beautiful thing happened in the anti-nuclear movement in the 1970s and 80s, which accomplished really radical things in terms of actually stopping the nuclear industry from building more nuclear power, which some people think is a great climate solution, but short version, they're wrong. Solar and wind are so much cheaper, better, and don't leave radioactive waste that will be dangerous for 100,000 years, and can also be deployed. You can put up solar and wind turbines in weeks. Nuclear power plants take years to build. But the anti-nuclear movement, two things happened, one of which is consensus process came from the Quakers, which meant that you had a process that really helped everybody be heard and make decisions together, so you stopped the charismatic leader syndrome that created a lot of the craziness of 60s and other kinds of left organizing. Another thing was nonviolent direct action, where you made agreements before you acted. So you also didn't have some guy deciding he was in charge. But I think a healthy organization is an organization that respects all its participants. It has a democratic structure, and so it will keep white saviors, megalomaniacs, people who want to talk for 3 hours, etc., in check. And I think also having a good critique around race, class, gender, ageism, ableism, etc., also helps people. As you all know, or a lot of you know, I spent a lot of time in dealing with feminism. And what's his name? Chris, what's his name, who played Captain America, said at the height of Me Too this completely wonderful thing. Just because you have something to say doesn't mean it's your turn to say it. And that's something I think everyone needs to learn, is that sometimes your valuable role is as a listener. And I know I'm talking a lot and I'm on stage, but every time I drive around, I listen to podcasts. I'm on the other end too. So, it, so yeah, I think that's important. And in the same way that democracy, I love that Third Act and other groups now really look at democracy and climate as inseparable. The majority of people in this country and most countries want to see meaningful climate action. The more democracy we have, the more representative our government, the more climate action we get. The same people who want to gerrymander, take away voting rights, steal elections, serve the fossil fuel industry and stuff. So we want democracy in our movements. We want democracy in general.
You mentioned a little bit about kind of how race plays into the climate movement, but to add on to that, climate change affects everyone, but oftentimes minorities and underprivileged communities are the most impacted and the least likely to be heard. We know that leisure time is an important factor to consider when it comes to someone's involvement in the crisis, which is also something that these communities often lack. How can those with privilege help to amplify and make space for the voices that are most affected?
The first rule, ask them, what do you need? What do you want? What can we do for you? What does solidarity with you look like? I think listen to the people who are coming from those places. And a lot of times it's like somebody like me has a public voice, time, and resources, and so you have to spend a big part of your life listening to those other people and trying to bring their voices in. As a writer, I quote people, I interview people, and I try to be like a human amplifier for other people's stories. Sometimes it's important to visit people. I've talked, go see the impact they're having. And my friend Jaime Cortez grew up as a farm worker kid, became a wonderful writer. Some of you probably know his book, Gordo. We did a benefit for the Pajaro community of farm workers where he lives in the house his parents got flooded out by climate change driven flood. So I think, and he gave me a tour to show me what happened to Pajaro. You don't even have to go to North Slope, Alaska or Central America to see climate damage. People who've been burned out, farm workers working in unbearable heat, people who got flooded are, there was a period a long time ago where I thought climate change wasn't really going to impact us here a lot, and then the fires began. So there's solidarity too with the organizations working with those people, whether it's Amazon Watch, Resilience Force, or one of the things that I think is beautiful and would have been unimaginable 40 years ago is that a lot of important climate leadership has been Indigenous people. And, and it felt like people who remembered a deep past of not being alienated and at war with nature were the people who, in many cases, could lead us to a future that was not alienated and at war with nature. So some of those people are there. And, it's also, if you donate to organizations that support them and amplify them. And, and it's funny because also so many times the things we're supposed to do as people who are politically engaged always sound like you have to eat your broccoli. But so many of the things we actually have to do, I think, are like drink. Okay, now a lot of you are underage, but to me, feel like drink your champagne, and which I've been old enough to do for 41 years, and in that they're like listening to Indigenous climate leaders. It might be your homework, but it might also be beautiful, inspiring, transformative, and uplifting. These things we need to. A democratically organized group is a group. It's a joy to be in. So these things are things we need to do for moral reasons, but the moral thing to do and the fun thing to do are actually often the same thing to do.
The urgency described in the book really motivated me, and it made me feel really wide open and hopeful. And I really loved a essay about envisioning a better future, a love letter from the clean energy future, which imagined powering the energy with 100% clean energy by 2030. If we give up, like you were saying, it means on giving up on future generations as well. So how do we create a narrative that helps people understand the urgency of our situation and the impact of our actions now, how it will play out in the future?
Different things work for different people. And if somebody's 12, they might not have the same body of knowledge somebody who's 40 has accumulated. Somebody might be, really motivated by a really moving story of loss or a really moving story of victory. Or they might be a nerd who loves the statistics, like this is how much renewable energy we installed last year. How many of you know that California got 113% of what it needed from renewables earlier this month? I'm not very good at technical things, but so I try not to talk too much about some of the technical stuff unless I'm quoting or something. But some of it is really exciting. I know the energy revolution is happening really fast and scaling up fast, getting better, getting cheaper, and so it's really different things. So it's really kind of meeting people where they're at. What are they excited by? What are they moved by? What moves people? I do feel there's been a big belief on the left that fear and anger motivate people. A lot of I actually think hope and love really motivate people. A lot of what gets described as anger, I think, is protectiveness. If you don't care about something, you don't want to protect it, so you're not angry if you see it being threatened or hurt. You're angry the tree was cut down because you love the forest, and so you need to see that or even if a lot of what gets called, when anger can mean so many different things, from my intense surge of adrenaline when a car almost runs me over when I'm on my bike, to ugly hatred, to what I think a lot of activists have that I don't think is really anger. It's righteous indignation. It's terrible to do that to these people. Let's protect, and that's really love. There's a part of love that can be indignation. That's really protectiveness. So I feel like that's really important too. Is what are our real motives? What do you love? And almost everybody loves nature. One of the beautiful things I've seen over the last 30 years in particular is I think we've tuned in a lot more to the natural world. And that, I think, motivates a lot of climate action. Think of the place you love, whether it's the ocean, the beach, the forest, the hills, whether you love birds, butterflies, the caribou migration in northern Alaska, whales. I just hung out with a scientist whose specialty is phytoplankton, which I suspect he loves. And, so I think that love secretly drives us, and getting in touch with it and just reminding each other, because we're in a society that, and also I think social media makes hate and anger and indignation are cheap, easy emotions to stir up. But I think it takes real brilliance to remind people that the deepest and most important thing is love, and that we don't just love our friends and family and dessert and rainbows or whatever. We love being a member of we love being connected to a community We love feeling that there's a decent future. We love feeling like this baby can live safely to be 80 years old. We love justice. We love truth. We love honor. We love dignity. We love people who, are motivated by beautiful principles. So we talk about moral injury when we see ugly and destructive things. We love moral beauty. The wonderful psychologist Dr. Keltner at UC Berkeley talks about awe. And when he wrote his book on awe, which I highly recommend to everybody, I really thought he was going to talk about the way beautiful and profound things, seeing the Milky Way, seeing the eclipse. I got to be in Texas for that, et cetera. But the first thing he said people have experiences of awe around is moral beauty. When somebody acts with tremendous integrity, often in a way that is difficult or risky and stuff, and being reminded of our better selves, I think, is a really important part of all this work, because a lot of popular entertainment, social media, etc., has a really ugly, reduced view of who we are as human beings. And a lot of times I see people who think what we need, like what Art for the Climate movement should be, is representations of windmills and suns, or oil derricks, etc. And we need those, but we also need things that remind us we are the people who want these bigger, deeper things. We are the people who have the power to change the world. So we need these stories of who we really are and what we really want. And that's been a lot of what I've dedicated my life to. So.
To end off, I wanted to read an essay titled "Shared Values Are Our Greatest Hope and Strength" by Gloria Walton. She writes that capitalistic values have promoted individualistic mindset and made us believe our resources are finite and competitive. But that doesn't have to be our reality. It's our collective responsibility to envision and create a world we want together. We have the power to tap into abundance and collaboration. And community leadership isn't about having it all figured out. It's about the creative spirit and the solutions created together through collaboration.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about kind of evoking that feeling of love towards the climate. How do you think that we can inspire others to feel the same? And how can we envision and execute this within our communities?
The love is usually already there, but you have to remind people, and you have to remind them that it's not just that you like these pretty things. There's a weird language in the sort of settler colonial world of responsibility, which for me always feels like you have to clean your room and pay your taxes. And it's very responsibility to me sounds like a very dutiful world. I love that Robin Wall Kimmerer, the indigenous botanist biologist, talks about reciprocity. If you begin by seeing evolution gave us, our own species. Every single thing we eat every day, the water we drink, we can't live for more than a very brief time without, separate from nature. Astronauts' bodies start falling apart almost instantly in space, and they have to do all this crazy stuff to deal with it. And of course, everything they'll survive on, the air, the water, the food, comes from Earth. And and I love that quote also because individualism, the isolated individualism, we more and more see as a problem because we are not separate. And, we are interdependent on each other. I'm not making any of the clothes I wore. I just came on a train I didn't build, powered by energy I didn't generate. Somebody else produced this paper. The wonderful water systems that give us really good water in the Bay Area. Nature gave us the water. The EBMUD, I think the EBMUD system brought this to us. Although I have a little hetchy in my water bottle back there. And it's actually, I think that connection is so beautiful. So remembering that, I think I think a lot of people are ready to do it if they know what to do. And that's, that was what can you do about the climate emergency part. And the looking back from the climate future piece you referenced a little while ago, that's by Marianne Hitt. And I know we're winding up. I just want to say who she is. She's a working class woman from West Virginia who became one of the leaders on the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign. And West Virginia is kind of the national center of coal mining. It also happens in Kentucky and Wyoming and stuff. But she led the way to shut down more than 500 coal-powered plants and prevent a bunch more from being built. We get so much less energy from coal than we ever did once we started generating electricity. And it's all happened a lot faster than anybody thought it could. And really, people thought coal was going to be here forever. And coal companies have gone bankrupt. It's shut down. It's transforming fast. And so she's somebody who actually already made the future better. And she's got a daughter who's in middle school, and she's in a bluegrass band. And so people are doing stuff everywhere. And it's not always easy to see. The media doesn't do a good job representing it, but we're not waiting for it to happen. We're just, it's happening. We're just trying to support what's already happening and keep dreaming our way forward. So, thank you.
All right, can we just give it up for our student interviewers one more time? They worked incredibly hard to prepare for this event. Well done. So at this time, we're going to transition to Q&A, and we're going to take student questions first. Adults, thank you for holding your questions while they ask theirs. Karam, you want to start us off? I know you had a question. Yeah, come on, and if you just want to go ahead and head right over here, Ellen has the mic.
Yeah, so students, if you want to ask a question, you can come on, line up right over here.
Thank you. If you had a chance to talk to a group of powerful people who are contributing to climate change, such as the CEOs of corporations and politicians who defend their interests, what would you tell them?
Oh, those people are so good at not listening to people like us. But I would tell them they have enough money, but what they lack is moral beauty. That they're monetarily rich, but they're morally, emotionally, spiritually impoverished by what they're doing, and that history will see them as villains unless they turn this thing around. And I'm not sure. I don't know what reaches people like that. I know diplomats who talk to people like that all the time. I don't. I mostly write unpublished things for regular people to read, and normal humans who have some moral beauty, like all of you, and these three fantastic interviewers up here, and and it's interesting because, like Christiana Figueres, the Costa Rican diplomat who led the Paris Climate Treaty to its miraculous successful conclusion, spent a bunch of time talking to oil industry executives, and a bunch of climate activists I know really kind of didn't respect her for doing that, but it was kind of a normal thing for a diplomat to do. But she finally said, although she's much more polite than me, so she didn't say it quite like this, fuck them, they didn't listen, they're in bad faith, they're not going to do what we tell them, we just need to shut them down from outside. She said it much more diplomatically. Because it's also something I say a lot in relationship to climate is we don't need to convert our enemies, we need to motivate our friends. The fossil fuel mega millionaires are not most of them are not going to listen to us, but we can be more powerful than them. Because there's really a sense often that our job really is to convert our enemies, that we have to go argue with people who don't agree with us. They're a pretty small minority at that point, even though some of them are very powerful, and 49 of them are senators, and and one of them, who just went into a whole tirade about wind, is a presidential candidate. But we are billions. We are more powerful than them if we come together, build a climate movement, etc. So it's really about motivating everyone motivating everyone who already agrees with us is always the main thing we need to do.
What has the response to Not Too Late been, and what has that showed you about like the climate movement, especially from young people? Sorry, the microphone sounded weird.
And I occasionally get flack from climate doomers who hate me for being hopeful, which is the least surprising thing in the history of the universe. And but it's been pretty positive. We've sold a bunch of books. We've given a ton away. We put a study guide and the What Can I Do chapter free downloads on the website. I post mostly positive climate stuff at the Not Too Late Facebook page every week. And but what we really wrote this book for, and what I'm so grateful to you, teachers, climate advisors, et cetera, in the Berkeley School District, what we really wanted this to be is a book that came into the schools, and we're so excited that it's that is part of the climate curriculum here. And so that's kind of what we hoped it would do. And we've got, we have climate scientists in the book. We've got a lot of support and encouragement from people, from climate organizers, climate scientists, etc. And the really interesting thing about the climate doom thing is the people who are really doing the work at the very heart of the climate crisis, the scientists, the organizers, the activists, are not defeatists. They take this very seriously. They understand better than almost anyone some of the terrible things that are happening, could happen, etc. But they're not quitters. They're not giving up. They still know what we do matters, and the difference between the best and the worst is a profound difference for so many human beings, species, places. And that, I think, is the real, there are people, and there's some doomer profiteers who I think are, pretty bad faith. And then just some earnest people who have bad information, who think that it is too late, that nobody cares, there's nothing we can do, but we're deciding the future in the present. It hasn't been decided. And there are parameters, but we're deciding it. Looks like there's another question there.
So, is it correct there's a plan for California to only sell electric cars by 2035?
I think so, and that's a technical fact check question that a quick search could probably answer. I know we're supposed to phase out selling gas cars, although since cars last for 10 or 20 years, I don't think there will be no cars on the road. But a statistic I could throw out is a few years ago, 1 in 20 cars sold worldwide was electric. It's now 1 in 5. And one of the really big...
More than what?
1 in 5.
Wait, this year 1 in 5 cars sold is electric?
Yeah. And one of the really interesting things that the policy experts talk about a lot is the S-curve. A lot of people expect change to be, move at a steady pace, but the S-curve means there's a tipping point where, electric cars get a lot cheaper if we make more of them. They work for people a lot better if there's a lot more charging stations. One of the amazing things is the cost of solar and wind has dropped 60 to 80%, I think, in the last decade. And it's gonna keep dropping. There's fossil fuels cannot get too much cheaper because it costs so damn much to destroy the earth, refine them, ship them, etc. But renewables, we're gonna have more energy than we could ever possibly need, and it's gonna be really cheap. And it's one of the things that Thelma and I, my co-editor, like to talk about is that we're not looking at a future of austerity. We live in a world of austerity. We're told is abundance, austerity of hope, austerity of connection, austerity of clean air, clean water, human health.
What's austerity?
Austerity means sacrifice, poverty. Austerity is we can't have nice things. We need to live very, live with the bare minimum, etc. Abundance means the opposite, because actually we can have really abundant energy, and living in a world where our energy isn't destructive, corrosive, polluting, giving the kids in Richmond near the refineries here asthma, etc. A world that's better designed. Like we could have an age of abundance if we do what the crisis really requires.
We do live in a world of abundant energy. All we need to do is harness it.
Exactly. We are saying the same thing. But we need to make this transition as fast and decisively as possible to leave the age of fossil fuel behind and move to this better future. So, is there another question?
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, I was wondering if you could give a few book recommendations for people who want to learn more about climate change and conservation.
Yeah, Greta Thunberg put out a really big, thick anthology a year or two ago. But I actually get a lot of my information from podcasts. David Roberts has a podcast called Volts that's about clean energy. That's kind of wonky, but often really good. He's brilliant on Twitter about renewables and climate change. Christiana Figueres has a podcast I really love called Outrage and Optimism. That's a big overview by people, kind of, she's a high-level diplomat and two other people. And also the world is changing really fast. The Guardian is the best English language newspaper for covering the climate crisis. It's not based in the US, and it's not afraid to tell the truth. It doesn't need to be nice to the fossil fuel industry and the people who support it. And so it's, for me, a lot of it, staying informed, is finding a good website, good people on social media, if you do social media, good podcasts. Because also, things that were true, and we did this book, it might feel outdated in a few years, and and I'm also saying all this because I'm kind of drawing a blank on the books I would recommend. I'm trying to picture the climate section of my bookshelf at home and which books I'd recommend. And I've really put my own climate knowledge together from so many different bits and pieces, and including news, talking to people who know, etc. But I think that the right climate diet for everybody is important. And I think something that's also important is you don't have to gorge on things that make you feel depressed. The thing that often just kind of wounds my soul the most is bad news about the oceans. And so sometimes I just look at a story and it's I don't need to read that. I'm already fully engaged in one more story about ocean health, their coral reefs, whales, that's going to make me feel really bad, is mostly just going to make me feel really bad. Some people think their feelings are their activism, and especially people who spend too much time on social media and they kind of foreground that they're upset, they're angry, they're, and your feelings are something you need to take care of, but our actions need to have consequences. I also say a lot, I totally respect despair as an emotion, but please don't confuse it with an analysis. You can feel absolutely devastated and understand that it's still worth trying. And that, I think, is important too. So that's kind of how I think about those sources. And I post a lot of climate stuff on my personal Facebook page and some stuff on Twitter. Follow a bunch of brilliant climate people like Bill McKibben, climate scientists, Leah Stokes, who's a climate policy genius. She's in our book. A lot of young climate organizers in Africa and Asia. I have, obviously, this is kind of my full-time thing, and I have a lot of time and energy for it. You don't need to, I'm like a person who's eating 100 pounds of data a day. Maybe you need 3 pounds a week, so there's that too. So, but are you the last person with a question? Or
I think so.
Non-students or?
Yeah, I think if there's anyone, we have a little time for a few more questions. If there are any non-students that wanted to ask a question, now's a good time to come up.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's great. Thank you very much. A number of us here in Northern California are being really interested in reflection of sunlight. Just, it doesn't take much money at all to cover a mylar sheet of plywood and reflect solar energy out into space. And so we're talking about trying to get 350 million homes with white reflective shingles, factories with white to reflect sunlight. And your counsel, your opinion on how to propagate the idea that everybody can make a change. You can get in a white car. You can make a little reflective thing and put it in your backyard. You can, when it comes time to change the ceiling on your condominium, advocate for white. So I'm wondering your opinion on how to propagate what we think is probably the most effective way to make an immediate effect. Thank you.
We basically need to stop burning fossil fuel is the single most important thing, and we need to do. But all of these things are good. I've loved those stories about the super reflective white paint that was just invented. And one of the things I find really moving and hopeful and encouraging is because I gorge on climate stories all the time, is just feeling like there are engineers, designers, inventors, scientists all over the world working on different things. How can we make cement and concrete that doesn't have such a big climate impact? How can we, like curbside composting, which San Francisco and Berkeley have, eliminates a lot of the methane production from landfill? How can we have regenerative agriculture and make agriculture climate negative instead of climate positive in terms of contributing to climate change? How can we change the transportation system so people don't have to drive so much? And and so all these pieces are important, and I don't think and one of the things I actually love and I'm sometimes frustrated about, there is no one solution. There's many, and we need to do a whole lot of things at once. And because people in some sense have an easy time with a problem where it's like the 1970s, 80s, you're old enough to remember, Save the Whales was like, we have one problem with one solution, stop killing whales. And, but this is like the whole earth, the problem has many dimensions, the solutions have many dimensions, and I think one that I haven't mentioned I think is important is to do the things we need to do to protect the earth. I think we have all these practical things, but I think we'll only do them if we have the values, the understandings, the insights, the kind of integrity to do them, so that cultural transformation of consciousness also really matters. Understanding how what we do and how everything we do is connected to the whole system. And I grew up in a world where people pretended what you ate, used, burned, threw away had no impact. Now we recognize, in ways that are both beautiful and terrible, the interconnection of all things, the way that the pollinators create the healthy environment that creates the food that we depend on is a beautiful story. The ugly story is the chemicals we put out end up in the bodies even of polar bears in the Arctic. But so understanding the interconnection, I think, is part of it too. But I think it's many, many pieces. So.
Hello, my name is Nilangor. I'm a local climate activist, and I have been doing my activism in Berkeley since 2016, and also advocated for gas ban as well in the Berkeley. I really liked what you shared about the gas ban, just because we have a 400 gigatons worth of carbon budget left before we cross 1.5 Celsius average global temperature. And that allows us 6 to 11 years. Now, 6 to 11 years fit only carbon dioxide, but non-carbon dioxide greenhouse gas emissions like methane is really important, because when we reduce them, it allows us to actually have more time in order to fight the climate change. And so for methane, it's not only the gas that we actually burn in the kitchen, but it's also what we cook on that gas as well. And what I'm actually meaning is the meat. According to the Berkeley's consumption-based greenhouse gas inventory, household meat consumption has more methane associated than the gas that's burned in the kitchen household. In California, 55% of our methane footprint is associated with dairy and meat industry. In United States, the highest methane emission source is enteric fermentation, with fourth being the livestock manure management. So I want your opinion in how we can actually reduce our meat and dairy consumption in order to actually have more years to work and to fight the climate change. And not only that, but also have more land available to us, which is right now mainly used for growing livestock feed as well as creating pasture land. And so that is also the biggest cause of Amazon deforestation as well. And when we shift towards plant-based food, it allows us to restore the ecosystem into its natural form, which captures the carbon dioxide as well. So what do you think, and what do you share with us about reducing meat and dairy consumption to fight the climate change?
That's a great follow-up question to the last one, because it's about another piece of the big picture that also matters. I think that, like with fossil fuel, the beef industry, they should pay the real cost. I think grazing on public lands should be cut way back. The New York Times did a shocking graph showing that more than 60% of the water that human beings take out of the Colorado River goes directly or indirectly to livestock, almost entirely cows, to grow the alfalfa, hay, etc. And something that's been happening a lot the last 20, 30 years is convincing people to eat a more plant-based diet, and that it can be delicious and nutritious and etc. I actually got to hang out with the daughter of Francis Moore Lepay, who wrote Diet for a Small Planet in the 1970s, the first manifesto with recipes, which I thought was a very female form of revolutionariness. It was like, there is enough food for everybody on Earth, but feeding, growing things to feed to animals that we're going to eat wastes a lot of food. It's much better if we just eat, grow plants to eat. And so I think it's a lot of different things. And I think also one of my brothers, not David, my lovely brother Steve, who's got sons in the Berkeley School District, worked in mental health for a while as the IT guy in San Francisco. And he's a big fan of harm reduction, because I think a lot of times you tell people, like, and the right is really making, a lot of propaganda with this, like, you'll never eat another hamburger. And harm reduction is like, if it's applies first of all to substance abuse. Like, okay, maybe you can't quit drinking, but maybe you can do a lot less right now. You can taper it down. And I think people tapering it down is good. I kind of love that moment a few years ago when suddenly the most fast food McDonald's-y places all started out offering Impossible burgers and vegan options. And it's also a kind of S-curve. If there's enough vegans or people who want to eat vegan food out there, it gets offered, it's on the menu, and then sometimes it just tastes good and people opt for it. I think there's a bunch of different pieces to that. And there's also ways, part of that methane from cows comes from feeding them grain, and there's so many different pieces of the picture to be solved. But yeah, food and agriculture produces a lot of greenhouse gas, and the meat industry is a real culprit. And it's really interesting always looking at, like, what does produce those emissions. I think the shift to focusing on methane, not just carbon dioxide, has been really important, because methane doesn't stay in the atmosphere as long, but it's 80 times as heating. And we've got to, if we can dial it back, as you said, that's important. It's also just really interesting as we get, the data just keeps getting more and more precise and better. I read earlier this month that computing in the cloud produces as much carbon emissions as air travel, and lots of people know how to, like, give you a hard time about flying on airplanes. And when you break that down, a huge amount of that is streaming. Like 60% of that is streaming, thank you Netflix, And 27% of that streaming is porn. So porn has a huge climate impact. Among the other devastating things it can do. So it's really interesting when the data gets better. But I digress.
So I think we just have time for one more question. Apologies to those that are waiting, but do you want to ask one last question?
Yeah. Should we take a couple and see if they, or a few and see if they go together, and I can do what I can do?
Thank you so much for being here. And I have two students at Oxford Elementary School, so it's also so inspiring to see students here. And I continue to be so inspired by this community. So I want to thank you all for co-creating this together. And a question I have is related to the COP28 language around phase out. And part of the compromise language there was an addendum which said phasing out fossil fuels in a just and orderly fashion. And this kind of dovetails with an appropriation of just transition language by fossil fuel and I think the banking interests I'm hearing it from as well. This idea that we can't rob development from the global south, and they are entitled also to the cheap energy that we've benefited from, and therefore like a just transition includes access, right? And so how are you seeing that narrative being effectively countered, and what kind of wisdom would you point to for countering that as it comes up?
You mean that we have to let the global south develop and have their turn?
Yeah, the just and orderly transition piece of it, that there's a moral obligation to facilitate the fossil fuel perpetuation in that case.
I don't think there is an obligation to facilitate it. I think the real moral obligation is for the wealthy global north to subsidize an energy transition. And China is actually still burning a lot of coal, but implementing a lot of renewables. The future is renewable. The fossil fuel age will come to an end. It's just a question of whether we do it swiftly. And yeah, in the short term, it costs a lot to build renewables if you already have a coal plant or something, but it's so much cheaper in the long run, and also the health benefits, because it's not like, a huge amount of those more than 8 million deaths from particulate matter from burning fossil fuel happen in Asia, particularly India and China. So the idea that they're benefiting from that development, you have to say, who's benefiting? It's not the people who are dying, it's not the people. So I think it's, I think there's a, you asked a kind of technical question without reviewing the data. I can't give too technical an answer. I think a lot of the answer though is helping, and this gets talked about all the time in these meetings, the global north spending a hell of a lot of money to facilitate clean energy there. And it's interesting because a lot of places people are still not developed at all. And a lot of times clean energy, like why not just go straight to solar rather than having an era where you burn dirty fuel? And, and those people benefit from the transition too. So it's not like they, but of course the global north, a lot of the global north and China, and India and China is still producing the lion's share of emissions. So we need, particularly the U.S., which is so disproportionate, needs to scale way down ourselves, because there's also like you can't tell other people to do what you're not doing. Let me see. Should we wind it up? One more question. What do you think?
Yeah.
Okay, I loved and appreciated your book on disaster collectivism. I can't recall the name of it.
A Paradise Built in.
Yes, and I'm wondering if you could speak to that. The climate is changing. There's so much more extreme weather happening now, and how can we sort of integrate and fuse the two of building resilience at the same time we're trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and as we work together, we're building community, which is such an important part of this movement.
Yeah, so I wrote a book that came out in 2009 called A Paradise Built in Hell, The Extraordinary Communities That Arise in Disaster, about the way people respond to sudden disasters, the 1906 earthquake, whose anniversary I think was this morning, 100 and somebody do the math, I'm busy. And 118th, I think. And there, I did the math while you watched. Don't ever ask me to do that again. At 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, et cetera, that people, despite what the disaster movies and bad journalism told you, most people respond with courage, generosity, creativity, and take care of each other. And I thought that was really important to know for the age of climate crisis, where we're going to have a lot more disasters and more intense disasters. Some of those are slow disasters like heat waves, crop failure, famine, drought, where you don't necessarily have the same response. But I do think that one of the ways we're very impoverished in this country is in a kind of collective wealth, the things we own together, including the sense that we own things together, the natural world, the community both as the public spaces and as our relationships to each other. And I think that's part of the abundance narrative we can tell. Doing what the climate requires of us can build a world of more abundance, of trust, confidence, relatedness, connectedness, and more time. If we're not busy consuming so frantically, we don't have to produce so frantically, which means we don't have to work as much, which Americans do way too much. A lot of that, partly because Reaganomics skewed the economy. But we made this kind of bargain when Europeans decided to work less hours and live more modestly, that we would have more stuff, but work more. And if you have more time, you have more time, and that time goes into relationship, whether it's to your own inner life, to your creativity, to the people around you, to the natural world, to developing your skills in some way. And so my takeaway from A Paradise Built in Hell is, in part, is sometimes disasters make people behave in these beautiful and extraordinary ways, but often it's like they got shaken awake and fell asleep again. What is the discipline, the value system, the recognition that lets us stay awake, and how do we encourage it? Awake to what our deepest yearnings are, which I think are for community, belonging, meaning, purpose, hope. These things they're not going to sell you when they're trying to sell you cars and shoes and milkshakes. And so I think that's also part of the work, is reminding us what we want most deeply and how we get it, which isn't through capitalism and consumerism and the alienation and isolation that make us good capitalists and consumers. We want these things money can't buy, and that would, and we can have them, but it takes this work and engagement that begins with, remembering, knowing this deep self and its deep longings. So, and that might be a perfect place to end. Thank you all so much. Thank you especially.
So Rebecca will be available in a couple minutes. Rebecca, thank you so much for being here. This has been such a gift. I know I'm walking away feeling super inspired. I'm sure you all too. She'll be available in a couple minutes in the lobby to sign books. And our friends at Miss Dalloway's are out there selling books for 15% off. Highly recommend that you support them, our local bookstores. But thanks so much for coming, y'all.